So good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out tonight. We really appreciate you taking your time this evening to be here. I am Shane Winters. I am the Provo Public Works Public Services Director, which oversees stormwater and streets. We wanted to hold this meeting because we continued to receive a lot of questions and concerns from the community and the residents above Buckley Draw. And we felt it was important to meet with you face to face so that we could really directly interact with you and answer those questions and concerns that really directly impact those by the recent debris flows. So we understand many of you have questions, again, questions and concerns. Our goal tonight is to provide as much clarity and information as possible. We're going to start with the presentation to give you some context and address the most common questions we've been hearing. After that, we'll open up for a question and answer period where you'll have the opportunity to ask about anything we may not have covered. We want to make sure everyone leaves tonight with a better understanding of the situation and the work that has been done and is continuing to be done. Giving the presentation this evening will be Jacob O'Brien. He is our Public Works stormwater engineer. He will also be joined by Tim Thompson. He is with GeoStrata. He is a geotechnical consultant that specifically works with geotechnical hazards such as debris flows. Tim has been assessing geotechnical hazards around specifically Buckley Draw and also Slate Canyon for the last 10 years. And he'll be able to provide expert insights regarding the area and how debris flows work. Tim has also been assisting the city in helping evaluate the recent debris flows and providing expert recommendations. Also, we have Gordon Height. He's here. He is our Public Works Director. We also have Richard Snyder that's sitting next to Tim. Richard is our Streets and Stormwater Superintendent. I've asked him to be here. He is the boots on the ground. He is the one that has been, and his crews, I really want to acknowledge, have been up there since the first debris flow has been up there almost on a daily basis. He and his crew have been camped out there on nights, on big rain events, and done an outstanding job on not only cleanup, but a lot of unrecognized things that have happened that we will kind of go through. He has helped really put those in place and built those in what we consider an extremely quick manner, which is oftentimes not seen or noticed or understood of how much effort goes into doing that. So I just wanted to say and just let you know, thank Richard. Go up to him and thank him for him and his hard work. So lastly, we'll go ahead and again, we thank you for all your patience and engagement, and I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Jacob.
Thank you, Shane. I'd like to provide a quick overview first so we can see where we are, what we're talking about, where Buckley Draw is, and so forth. So you can see this area outlined in blue is Buckley Draw. It's just east of us. Here's the school that we're all seated in right now. Any water that falls within this blue area drains down to a single point right here. And so we call that a watershed. The area of the Buckley Draw watershed is over 500 acres, and it's a very steep canyon. Buckley Draw caught fire in 2002, and we had a minor debris flow in 2003. The debris flow channel was constructed in anticipation of that potential flooding back in 2003. And this was built by NRCS, who is part of a federal agency. A debris flow channel is basically a large channel. It's a large trench with a berm built up on one side. And the purpose of it is to collect those flows and then convey them to a safer location and to protect homes downstream. So all of the homes in this neighborhood have been and are currently protected by this debris flow channel. In August this year, 450 of those 500 acres caught fire and burned, and we had a very intense rainstorm shortly after that caused a debris flow. This type of flooding never would have occurred if it were not for the fire. We know that we've had a lot of pretty intense storms on the East Bench, and the ground is able to soak them up without any problem. But with the fire, it changes the way the ground is able to intercept and allow that water to infiltrate into the ground. Here's the church that was impacted by the debris flow. And you've heard a lot, you've probably driven by and seen it, but there is a residential development that's currently being constructed, and that's outlined here in green. So hopefully this kind of shows where we are in relation to Buckley Draw itself. I wanted to hit on several questions that we see going around, and I'll get to those here in just a minute. I'd like to discuss what leads up to a debris flow. So we had a very hot, dry summer. As you're aware, the hillside caught fire, and we had that intense rainstorm 10 days later and had a debris flow that same night. This map is put out by NOAA. It's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And this was a predictive map that showed what the expected temperatures were for Utah. Well, for the whole nation, but you can see that right here in Utah, we're above average. And that is what happened this summer. We had above average temperatures and lower than normal precipitation. It may seem like we have a lot of rain recently, which we have from this monsoon season. But prior to that, it was very hot and dry. We had a storm where we received 0.7 to 0.8 inches of rain in 30 minutes that caused this debris flow to come down. Again, I wanted to reiterate that that flow would not have occurred if we had not had that fire. This is an isometric view, similar to what we're looking at, but it shows the area that was burned within the watershed. So if you can kind of see the dashed outline, that's the entire watershed. Almost 90% of it burned. Just to put it in context, if you were to look at Lavelle Edwards Stadium, not just the field, the whole site that you see here, it's about 10 acres. And so it would take about 45 of those next to each other to equal that same area that burned. And not only that, it's not flat. It's on a very, very steep hillside. So when the water hits that burned soil, it causes a much higher runoff rate. Okay, the first question I'd like to go over is, why did the developer remove the fences prior to constructing the debris flow channel? And I've highlighted these in red. You can kind of see these lines here. These are debris flow fences that were built in 2003. And I'll show you a picture of them here in a couple of slides so you can see what they look like. And there was also a concrete barrier located down here on the downstream end. For nearly 2 years, the city has worked with the developer to come up with a site that meets city requirements and also addresses the potential for off-site flows. One of the requirements for this development is to extend the permanent debris flow channel. So the channel currently ends, can you guys see my cursor okay? The mouse pointer. It ends in this area, and it needs to be extended. The city approved a mass grading plan for the subdivision and channel that would provide superior protection to these 2003 debris flow fences. It was approved for grading only, not for home building yet. So no homes would be allowed to be built until the debris flow channel is completely constructed. The developer was able to start on the grading for the site. So all of this area here where you've seen that they're out there moving dirt around. And the idea was that they were going to build the subdivision and the channel basically at the same time. However, they got caught up, they got delayed in obtaining permits from Rocky Mountain Power. They needed to do some work with one of their guy lines, so those are the lines that hold the poles in place. And they were in conflict with the channel, and it just took longer than they had anticipated to work through that. So they were able to start grading for this site, and in doing that, removed these fences to prepare the grading, prepare the site, be able to put the roads in. Then we had the fire, and we did not anticipate that. They didn't anticipate it, and we certainly didn't anticipate that we would have this debris flow on top of it. But again, this was part of constructing a superior system to capture those flows. It just takes some time to build it. Next question is, wouldn't the 2003 debris protection fences have protected the church? No, they would not have. These were never meant to handle the kind of flows that we saw this year in 2025. You can see here, looking at the picture on the left, even with a couple of feet of mud against it, it's starting to bow out a little bit. These are essentially, we call them silt fences. It's kind of like a tarp-like material you sometimes see around construction sites, held in the ground with some T-posts and some agricultural type wire mesh. They were put in and meant to be a temporary measure. They weren't meant to last for years and years. They simply were not removed, and they would not have stopped those flows. You can see in the image here on the right, the flows were able to hit the fence and kind of work their way around it, but they were directed basically to these trees downstream. So this is a picture from 2003. And this is approximately where the church was constructed in 2006. These fences would not have provided the protection for the church. And one other thing, yes, there was a concrete barrier further down here. And for those of you that saw the debris flow, there were additional barriers placed, and we'll talk more about it, but the mud was so great, it just pushed those right over. This is a comparison of 2003 and 2025, just to give you an idea of the difference in magnitude of what we experienced this year. We estimate that there's about 35 times the volume that came down this year compared to in 2003. I'm going to have Tim Thompson explain this slide a little bit and talk about what we saw in 2003 versus what we saw this year, and some modeling that we've done and why they are different.
So they asked me if I could just kind of explain the data in this slide in human terms. We have a lot of engineers that work on things, and they don't necessarily speak real English, so I want to try to explain kind of the data we're collecting and how it's going to be used in this mitigation design, okay? So a couple of things to note. The original fire in 2003 had a BEAR report, B-E-A-R, that's the post-fire burn report put together by the federal government. They determined that it looked like there could be a debris flow hazard, and so they came up with, and I reviewed a lot of documents on this basin that went all the way back to the 1983 floods that we had, 83, 84 flooding events. It's about the earliest documentation that I could find all the way to present. And one of the things, there's three components. This doesn't really show the first part, but there is, the first part of this is a deflection berm. So that flow is coming straight down Buckley Draw, and it basically has to be turned almost 90 degrees to run north along the mountain. And so that first component of the design is a deflection berm. You deflect the flow and turn it. Because there's a lot of homes below the basin, and they wanted to protect those homes. Then there is a conveyance channel, and this conveyance channel has an embankment. You could term it a berm, but it's basically an embankment that's built along the downhill side to create the channel. So once the flow is deflected, there's a certain length of channel that will then convey those flows until they passed all of the existing neighborhood. And then the federal government decided this was all undeveloped, all of this, including here. This would be a place where they could allow the flow. The flow maintains, debris flows maintain energy as long as they're channelized. As long as they're confined, they can keep their energy. The second the channel goes away, the energy starts to drop as they spread out. And it's the energy that allows the water to pick up the sediment. So, for instance, on the hillside, you'll notice some of the mountainside drainages don't have any channels at all, and others have channels. The ones with no channels probably don't have any or very, very little risk of debris flow. But those that have developed channels have the capacity to funnel water in a tight enough confined area, it'll get enough energy and pick up debris. So they wanted to design an area where that debris could be discharged along with the water. So the federal government is not great at sharing information. So they don't give their designs away. They don't give their engineering away. But we do have the deflection berm and the conveyance channel and the fencing, which I believe was a result of the engineering they did. And you can see from the first bit of information, these white lines in this, and I'll explain this blue in a minute, but those are the fences that the federal government put in the distribution area, the run-out area below the channel. They put those fences there because that's what they estimated the location would be of the debris and water after it came out of the channel where it would run. So they put the fences where they estimated that the water and debris would flow after it left the channel. So then what the city did, well, let's go in chronological order. So then after they installed that fencing, and I did read the report, something important to understand, the deflection berm, the conveyance channel, and the fencing were all designed to be temporary. None of that was designed and constructed by the federal government to be permanent infrastructure. It's all made to last the 5 or so years it takes for their watershed to revegetate. The fact that it's still in place, in good condition, and function as well as it did was actually a huge benefit that we gleaned as a community from the federal government's temporary structures. They built them good enough that they worked, even though they were 15 years or 25 years or whatever it was past their design life. And that's significant, really. I mean, anybody that receives any damage of any kind on their property, that's a significant event to them. But considering the catastrophic damage that a debris flow can do to a community, the way those function is very important. So, then we had the 2003 flooding event, and that was really a flooding event. It wasn't a debris flow in 2003. If you look at the amount of sediment and water that came out, they had a mild alluvial fan flooding event. And we know from the flooding event, the footprint of that went right where the fencing was designed by the federal government. So we have a second factor that's where debris would flow. It's where they estimated it would. They put their fences there, and when it happened, that's actually where the flow went. Then I asked the city to model a debris flow with the previous, we have LiDAR data from 2012-13. They flew very accurate. The state government did. The UGRC has all of the LiDAR data, sub-meter LiDAR. It's very good topographic data. And we use that to construct this model of the surface of the ground with the fencing prior to any construction. And they modeled the flows that would come out of the end of this distribution channel, well, the conveyance channel into the distribution area. And you can see where the third point you now have data point wise of where flooding would normally go based on that topography. The blue is where the model predicted water flow would go. Now, debris flows flow slightly differently than water. Water is a Newtonian fluid. Newton gave us the formula for how water acts. Debris is a non-Newtonian fluid. It doesn't act always like water. You got to think of it like a train. If a train goes off the rails, the back of the train could literally push the front of the train right up a hill or wherever it wanted to, because it has a connectivity to the stuff behind it and can be pushed forward by the things behind it. That's what debris flows can do. Was I looked at the stuff that came out of our 2005 post-fire events, the first one might have been a very water-rich debris flow, or it might have been a very debris-rich, hyper-concentrated flow. But I think we could call it a debris flow, but realize there's a lot of water in that. A good debris flow could be 80% sediment and only 20% water, and it would act a lot like concrete. And you can imagine the force that that could have is much more destructive than if it's water with a lot of mud and rock in it. So the model shows fluid flow coming down in the exact same place that the government predicted it did, and our small event in 2003 showed it would do. So the red lines are the outline of where the debris flow actually went in our first big event. And you can see that the outline of this flow doesn't follow the fencing locations, doesn't follow the 2000. It does a little, but you can see that we were starting to have flows being, once they overcame the fence, they wanted to just come downhill. So some of this was pushed by the fencing, but yeah, a lot of this went way north of the fencing. Why would that be? And that's because the topography of the ground was not the same. It's important to note that the grading at that site was not designed and done to prevent debris flow, okay? Nobody thinks that. It just so happens that when you, and there aren't any flat spots up there on that hill. They took a slope and they cut it flatter, but still sloping, because you, in a development, you want runoff. You don't want rain collecting around your homes and flooding your homes, so you have to have some pitch. And then it dropped down to another flatter spot, and then it dropped down to the road, which is, again, not perfectly level, but a flatter spot. All of this construction left a lot of available sediment. After the fire, there was very little time. The first fire happened in 2002. They had until the summer of 2003 before the debris flow. They had almost a year to build the infrastructure. This year, Provo had 7 days or something like that, 7 days or 10 days, very short time. Too short to even think about designing anything, let alone building anything or anything like that. It was just way too short. But what they had the ability to do because of the grading was take a large amount of sediment and put it in large rows, creating temporary berms. So what this red data shows me is that the flow came out of this channel and got caught up on this very first berm. And you can see that it kind of moved a little to the north. And then when it overcame the berm, it came straight down the hill. Well, this outline right here is a second berm. And so what happened is this flow got pushed farther to the north, and then it came down and hit a third berm and got pushed farther to the north, and then it came down to the road. The grading was not designed to mitigate debris flow. The channel and deflection berm were not designed to last 30 years. We were fortunate as a community that the berm and channel were in a good condition as that they're currently in. They need to be cleaned out now, that's what they're doing. And we were very fortunate that the construction site had enough break and slope and enough excess soil that it could create this flow pattern, because these are residential or this is below it here, okay, and this is the residential here. Yeah, sorry. And this is commercial buildings, businesses. This is a second church. So in a worst case scenario, if there would have been a lot of, and hey, I wouldn't want my church building damaged in the mud either. But the amount of damage with velocity is, you know, force equals mass times acceleration. And the mass is the weight of the soil and water, and the acceleration is gravity down the hill. And so the flatter a hill is, the less acceleration, which equals the less force. So the impact forces of this flood material was significantly reduced to what it would have been if it was flowing straight down that pre-existing slope. When it got here, it not only would have impacted things that it stayed in the road and didn't impact, but the force of that impact would have been significantly greater. So that's the data we're currently looking at. We're looking now at the design, which we already have looked at for this conveyance channel, and we're working out the last details to make sure that's as good as possible. However, nothing is designed in hazard mitigation to eliminate hazard. It's so important for this community to understand that. We reduce hazard to reasonable levels of risk. We simply cannot remove hazards. We had a 10-year flood that the federal government estimates acted like a 25-year flood. We estimated in our original analysis that a post-fire basin, this infrastructure would handle a 25-year storm event after a fire. Anything larger than that, and I think the deflection berm would have failed. If we had a 100-year storm event or a 500-year storm event, they're much lower probabilities, but much larger hazards. So the thing to take away is the temporary infrastructure worked as really good permanent infrastructure, and it moved the flood far enough to the north that while still sadly impacting the church, the residences, businesses, and everything else were not impacted. And this data should hopefully help you see that that's what happened. So all of the grading that happened here was not a detriment. It wound up being a serendipitous benefit. So that's the data that we're collecting, and then we're using that for engineering after.
Thank you, Ted. As Tim mentioned, the site grading actually reduced the flood damages of downstream properties. I'm gonna move on to the next question. So, didn't much of the mud that hit the church come from the development site? And the answer is no. The mud and debris came from the burned mountainside. And this fact is supported by eyewitness accounts, drone imagery, soil type and color that was transported downstream. And you can see by looking here, the mud comes out of the canyon, it passes through the site, and it does eventually impact the church. Now, it's not to say there wasn't any erosion from the site, period. There's always going to be some, but by and large, most of the debris we saw out on the road and that we saw hit the church and go down to State Street came from this, from the burned mountainside. The contractor who is working on this site did not observe any noticeable change in topography. It's not like there was a big chunk of land that sloughed off and came across the road to hit their church. This is a photo that just shows looking upstream, and you can see not all of the site, but a lot of it is compacted quite tightly in this area. That you can see it's been compacted. That's a typical construction requirement, and did not erode. Again, the mud and debris originated from Buckley Draw. Next question. What actions did the city and developer take after the fire began? So the fire started, and we had 10 days between the day it started and the day we had the debris flow. The very next day, we met to discuss ways to mitigate potential flood risks, and that was the Monday after. Days 3 through 5, the city met with a contractor to extend a temporary berm. It's one of the ones we looked at on the previous slide. Days 5 through 8, the city met with a contractor to construct additional protection measures in the site. And on day 10, the city installed Jersey barriers. Those are those precast concrete barriers that were placed out on both sides of Nevada Avenue. And that night, we had the flood occur. I wanted to mention that the city was aware of the fire and the potential flood risk, and worked hard to mitigate that risk. There are ongoing maintenance efforts. So if you were to look at the site today, this is what you would see. There are various berms and basins constructed to intercept flow that may come down out of Buckley Draw and to slow it down. So we're not seeing huge amounts of debris and mud. We're seeing muddy water come down, and are able to pump that from one pond to another and eventually get it into the storm drain system. Next question, the developer installed some berms and a basin. How well did those work? So we've talked about some of these berms, the longer one here, some of these that were constructed further up, and a basin that was constructed here. These were significantly more effective than the 2003 debris fences would have been. However, they were overwhelmed by the storm and the debris flow that came down. They were simply overwhelmed by it. However, if we were to have relied on what was there previously, those would have been overwhelmed in a much more catastrophic way. Again, these berms and basins and site grading worked to minimize the damage to homes, the other church, and nearby businesses. Next question is, why do you allow development on the hillside? Provo City allows landowners to develop their land as long as they meet certain requirements. And the requirement for this site is to extend the existing debris flow channel. So that's that line. I drew a pink line right here on it so you can kind of see where it's located. This is protecting the homes right here in this neighborhood. And the new homes that will be constructed just to the north of here are essentially receiving that same protection. We're just extending that channel up to protect them as well. What are the city's temporary and permanent plans to protect residents in this area from flooding? So the temporary plans, right now that debris flow channel is being constructed, and we anticipate that it will be completed within a month. While we're waiting for that to be constructed, we continue to construct and reconstruct as needed basins and berms that, as shown on this, I'm going to go back here. Shoot. Sorry. On this slide, found it. These are able to hold back those flows, and we're able to get them into the road so that they don't go down and impact private properties. As Tim discussed, these basins and berms slow the flows down and cause the sediment to be deposited on the site rather than continuing down with a greater force towards any neighborhood. So the permanent plan is to extend the debris flow channel on the upstream side of this development. You can kind of see, if you look, these are the lots that are planned in that area. And the channel will be extended from where it currently terminates, right about here, up to the north, and then it will go down the hill and cross Slate Canyon Drive where it enters a final basin. The area between where the channel currently ends and this corner will have about 10 acre-feet of volume. The current channel, when the sediment is removed from it that we're currently doing, has approximately 10 acre-feet. And the final basin we anticipate will have 15 acre-feet. So we're talking about a total of 35 acre-feet, which is more than double the flow that we saw come down in this year's debris flow. We also we're continuing to monitor the weather and coordinate with Weather Service. We are removing debris from this channel to restore its original capacity. How long will it take for the burn scar to recover? So it can take a very long time. Typically, it takes 3 to 5 years just for it to start to green up again. And it can take even a decade for trees to take root and grow in again. We will have the debris flow channel constructed soon. And while we wait for that burn scar to recover, we may see flows come down again. We had the second flow on September 22nd, and we've had some other more minor flows. I wanted to show this video here real quick. And we estimate that was about 50 to 60% of the flow rate that we saw with the original debris flow. You saw how much water was coming down, but with the infrastructure that we have in place, none of that impacted private properties. We were able to put it in these basins and slow it down and divert it into the storm drain system. In conclusion, I just want to reiterate that as a result of the changes made on the development site, flood damages were actually reduced. And if these changes had not been made, the flood damages would have impacted a lot of other homes and buildings. Thank you.
All right, now we want to really get into the question and answer phase of kind of the program. We got until about 8:15. We'll do about an hour. The school and the school district has asked us that we be finished and be out of here by 8:30. So we're going to try to wrap up at 8:15. During this portion, we want this to be fairly I guess, in a sense, make sure that we're going to be cordial, that we're going to make sure that we give you the ability to express kind of some of your feelings. We understand and are very empathetic to maybe some of the concerns and the fears that happen because of these hazards. So we want to give that time to you. And how we want to do this is more in a formal manner. So what we'd like to do is, if you have a question, you have a comment, you have a concern, just come up to the mic right here and go ahead and just state your name. We'll give you about 2 minutes. If you could keep it to 2 minutes, we'll have Danielle here. She'll keep track of the time so that she can inform you, kind of wrap it up. And then if it is a question, we will go ahead, our panel of 5 here will go ahead and address your question. So that you can get the answers and maybe get some of those things that you do have concerns with. So I'll go ahead and we'll start there, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up about 8:15. Right now, if we are not able to get to your questions just because of the time, we do have some contact information here. So you can contact our public services office, the phone number here, or you can contact that email right there, and we will follow up with you if you feel like you didn't have the opportunity or had some additional follow-up. So I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you, and we'll go from there. Make sure it's on. All right.
It's on. Hi, my name is Jared Kobia. We live in an adjacent neighborhood to the flow, and my question is actually not about the specific mud flow that impacted the church, but we live in a property that is close to Slate Canyon in Nevada. Has there been any investigation or information, or do you guys have any knowledge of the fact that there was a massive amount of water that came down from somewhere upstream, turned on Slate Canyon down to Nevada, and then flooded my property, the property next door to my house, and then like 4 or 5 other houses downstream of that. I had a river that was 25 feet wide. We later discovered that there was a storm drain there that had been covered up with debris, plastic, dirt, mud, sticks prior to the storm happening. So it was already covered up, and of course, when all that water came down, it had nowhere to go. And so it just went down through our property and flooded about 5 or 6 different houses. So just curious if there's been any investigation around that so that we can understand if we're at risk for future, because it's cost a lot of those homeowners thousands and thousands of dollars. Insurance isn't helping out, so.
Yes, so we are aware of that. We have met with some of the property owners that were impacted specifically. It was by, same rain event was August.
Yeah, same rain event.
August
Exactly.
27th, where we did receive a very high intense rain event.
Yeah.
Which is typical when we receive that high rain event, that our streets, right, are stormwater conveyance systems. So oftentimes, it can overwhelm our stormwater system.
Yeah, my main concern is that the grate was covered.
Yes.
And days after, people came and cleared it all out, and now it
Yes.
looks great.
So with the property owner, specifically one of them, we actually met up there, and we're more than willing
Yeah.
to meet additional people up there that were impacted specifically by that storm. We are putting measures in place.
Perfect.
We're actually starting here on Monday. We're going to add some additional features, stormwater features, that will help capture that and most likely reduce that flooding below Slate Canyon and down through Nevada Avenue.
Okay.
So yes, to that question, we're moving forward to help with that
Okay,
situation.
thank you very much.
You bet.
My name is Lynn Fawcett, and we live on 1477, so our house is right next to what would have been the park, and we're in the bullseye now. Where the basin comes down, where they've got all that, it points right at our house. So I have 2 questions. One, what's up with that? I mean, are we now in a flood zone because we're in the bullseye now? Because we were never in a flood zone before, and we were never consulted or asked anything about that. Number 2, what happens to all that park? What was going to be the continuation of Bicentennial Parks? What becomes of that now?
Jacob and Tim, or Gordon, you want to take that?
So we haven't finished the inlet structure, or the outlet structure, so that will be constructed at the end. Right now, it's just a rough grading, so it does look a little ominous, so I agree with you. So that will be diverted, so it will go down Slate Canyon. And the park is still going to be constructed. They're going to be doing neighborhood meetings to talk about what amenities, what features they want in there, and so those things will be happening. Our Parks Department will actually be running that investigation, but they have the funds now to extend that park.
And I have one more suggestion too. When you finish that grading, where that comes down, you need to install permanent fences across it. Because every guy with a 4-wheel drive is gonna be going up that and all over in there. They do it all the time. So if you put permanent gates across there.
You're 100% right. We're looking at bollards and other things, but yeah, we have to do something, otherwise it will be used. Thank you.
Thanks for your presentation. My name is David Sink. Are there any plans to reseed the mountain?
So, as Jake was saying, the slope is about 30%. From what we heard from the Forest Service, they're not, because of the steepness of the slope. So that's one of the reasons it's going to take some time. So that's where we're at.
During the fire, or after the fire in 2002, they were up there with helicopters reseeding like crazy.
And that's what I was going to mention. So they tried in 2002 and 2003. They actually did seed, and then they actually threw hay bales out of the copter to try to help, so that it could help that seed could help establish. What they determined from that is it wasn't successful. Because of the steep slopes, it didn't really take. And so this time what they have told us, the Forest Service, is they're not going to reseed, just because the first time was highly unsuccessful.
Okay, and one more question. On the when when the debris flow comes out of the mountain, then it hits that deflection at the night and makes it turn a 90. That saves me. I mean, I'm right below that. And I'm actually the low point. I mean, I'm the channel. That's where my house is. So thanks. I'm glad that's still there. But I noticed that it's been gouged out a lot. Are you guys going to be restructuring that, rebuilding that?
Yes, so the city, one of the things they've tasked us with, it's multiple tasking, right? Because we have to take a look at that basin and we try to estimate what might come out so that things can be designed properly. And when, I'm 60 years old, I'm no young man anymore, but maybe one or two of those events happens in my whole lifetime. You're looking at other places and other basins and trying to put things together. We're looking right now at modifications to the existing berm to armor it, to protect it from erosion, looking at its height and some other things because it wasn't designed to be permanent. We want to try to do what we can to make it permanent. We've come up with some additional ideas that we're interjecting these ideas into the design process in hopes that it's an improved condition when we're done. And we've learned an awful lot about this. And we do have some time in looking at that channel. Sediment comes mostly from the bottom of the channel, like I said. If you were to look at that channel, a large amount of it's right down to bedrock now. If there's a big enough rain event, I'm sure there's sediment up there that could come down, but the volume of sediment came out the last time, which was, I would consider kind of a design event, is not likely to occur again until that channel has time for sediment to slowly recharge. And the mountain's constantly eroding, and you're going to constantly be refilling, but at least we have some time, and they're looking at making those improvements. And I was just going to mention on your first question, I did talk with the guy from the Forestry Service specifically about your question of reseeding, because I thought that's what they would do. And what he told me was, back in the early 2000s, they had not just with Buckley Draw, but they had that kind of as a thing that the Forestry Service did. We're not allowed to do, it's their watershed. We go to federal prison if we touch their watershed. You can't do it. They had a program, they determined based on all the places that they'd seeded and those that they hadn't seeded, that spending all that money on seeding didn't get them any benefit. So they stopped doing that as part of their watershed rehabilitation, and they do other things for temporary mitigations, but they don't reseed. They just let it do it naturally. So we don't have any ability to do that, even if we wanted to. So.
Thank you. And to the man on your left, what was your name again? Richard. I've seen you and your guys up there. I've seen them working. Thank you. And so even before he mentioned you, I've seen you. So thank you for all your efforts. I appreciate it.
Thank you. My name is Bob Craig, and I have two questions for you. The first one you should be able to answer quickly. The second one may take a little more time. On Provo City's social media posts, and I heard it mentioned then, I've heard it mentioned again tonight, so correct me if I'm wrong. You're kind of scapegoating Rocky Mountain Power, saying because they didn't do their job, you and the developers could not do your job to prevent a lot of this? Because I've heard that a couple times.
So, no, the developer was never required to build the debris channel before he built the subdivision. That was not a condition of his approval. But he couldn't get a building permit till that was built, so we know he had to pay for it and build it. It was one of the requirements. You have to handle the utilities, so the answer, I don't believe we're scapegoating. We're just telling you that he wasn't required to do that. He followed the city procedures. However, following the city's procedures saved a lot of damage that would have happened to the second church, the first church, and the homes and the businesses. So fortunately, we followed policy and it went well, as good as could be expected. Second question.
Fair enough. Second question, I don't want to speak for everyone here, but I think this may be on everyone's mind. And Dave Connect and all those other legacy members that are here, we bought our house in 2001. We've been to many of these meetings. For years, this property, both on the west side and the east side of Slate Canyon, where all these problems happened, was slated to extend Bicentennial Park. Now, all of a sudden, the city sells this to a developer in a known floodplain. We talked about 2003 and all that. Why did the city approve this development to begin with? Why did they switch it from building a park there? Why did they switch it to the development that's currently happening now? Because I think that's what most of us are concerned about, is that development and everything else going on here.
Okay, and I can answer some of that. So that property was owned by the city for a number of years, and The city did not have the funds to build the park, so it just sat idly. So there was a plan came up, if we sold the one portion of the property, it would come up with enough money that the park would be built and finally built on the other portion. And that was, there were neighborhood meetings, a lot of discussion, and that was the final decision that came through the process. I went to a few of those meetings. I wasn't as intently involved maybe as I should have been, but that I know was through a neighborhood process that they went through on that. I don't know if that answered your question.
Not quite.
Okay.
What was the thought process that went on in your department and others to approve this whole land for this huge, big development?
So the same protection that is on that first development, the lower, just below Buckley Draw, we're putting a channel that's going to be even bigger and more robust than what's there. So they'll have the same protection you have when this whole project's in place. So we can mitigate it. In fact, like Tim said, the city has already put aside emergency funds, so we are not only going to repair and dig out the channel, we're going to put it back better than it was, because we have the funds to do that. So the protection you received in this last debris flow, you'll have more capacity, and it will be a more robust system for you and for the people that are coming in those homes. Both are going to have the exact same protection that you have today. I don't know if that helped.
Hi, excuse me. My name's Barry Card. I live at 1752 South Skyview Loop. I'm seeing a lot of city people here tonight. I don't see the developer here tonight. Who's paying for all of this work that's being done? As a taxpayer, as a homeowner here in Utah County, I'm concerned that my property taxes are going to go up because of this. And that's my first question. I'll let you answer that.
So the developer's paying for 100% of that channel. It's $500,000, so they cover that full cost.
I understand that,
And they'll
yes.
protect the church. They use their own forces and equipments to start building those first berms you saw, digging out. We're using our forces to maintain and dig out the channel just like we would normally have to do. The reason that channel was in such great shape is the city does take great care of its infrastructure and make it last a lot longer than people would expect it to. So we are up there with our crews. Again, Richard and his group would rather be out deer hunting, but we have them up there each night watching this thing, making sure that we clean it out each day. And that is going to be something we would have to do whether the developer was there or not. But they came in with tens of thousands of dollars to help move the berms and use their equipment. So yeah, there's very little city dollars in construction. Most of it's just maintenance.
So will you go on record in front of the camera, in front of all these people, and guarantee us our property taxes will not increase because of repairs that are being done up in this area?
Yeah, I can do that easily. This will be video and be put online. So this question and every part of this presentation will be in perpetuity on the city website. So the answer to your question is yes, and I don't know how to do it any more clear than that, but yeah, this will be online.
Okay.
So this will be up in the next few weeks so everybody can see it, and you can review this as well as the PowerPoint presentation so everybody can see that, as well as the base documentation that this all came from. So that will all be online.
My final question. Who in their right mind would allow a developer who needs to build a diversion channel to build without building the diversion channel first? From a safety standpoint, as a resident here, that's my biggest underlying question. Who would approve something like that? If it was an elected official, we need to know so we can get them out of office. If it's a city official, we got problems and we need to talk.
That's a legitimate question, and let me be really frank, that buck stops here with me. So let me explain how that works. They did not have a requirement to do the debris flow, the debris channel first. That was not a requirement given to
And
by the
that's
staff.
wrong.
And we can talk through that. I'll answer that. And the issue is, I will take you back and then I'll answer the question. Had we required them to get that approval, 7 of your neighbors would have been flooded, 2 churches would have been inundated, and the first church would have been damaged far worse. So that's where I wanted to emphasize we followed the city procedure. As a result of that, there was less damage in your neighborhood, significant less damage. Now, we're going to look at our standard of what we're doing, and we'll evaluate it over time, but there was no fire, there was no need for that at the time.
At the time.
And as a result, when we saw that that was coming in place, in 10 days, you had more protection than what was there previously, by a lot. Almost, we estimate about a half acre foot is all that those debris fences could have held. We looked at between 2 to 3 acres of debris was held on that mountainside because the developer was allowed to go forward first with that. So again, we're going to evaluate that over time, but because we followed that, there was a lot of benefit to the neighborhood.
Okay, I worked in the corporate world for 20 years. I was an executive. We plan for contingencies proactively, not reactively. And what the city of Provo has done is reacted to this reactively. As a citizen here in Provo, that makes me very uncomfortable with the leadership in this community.
I understand. I
That's
can
my
appreciate
statement.
that.
Thank you.
Hi, Crystal Blodgett. I have a pretty quick question. So part of the trail is closed as part of you cleaning out the original berm channel and the debris there. How long will the trail be closed? How long will it take for you to remove the debris from that original debris channel?
So right now, the contractor actually started last week, last Thursday. He estimated about 21 days is what he closed. We're actually going to give him 30 days. So about a month from when we started last Thursday, we'll have that cleaned out. Right now, he has about a quarter, maybe just a little less than a quarter of that channel cleaned out to roughly where it was before. So he is on pace to hit that. So right now, about 30 days from last Thursday, we should be out of there.
So will, sometimes they close off the entire area even after the cleanup is finished, but it will open the day after they leave?
Yeah, what we're gonna try to do, once they get that done, what we're gonna do is reestablish back that trail. We're gonna do some improvements to make it, because it was before we even started working up there, that trail was really rough. It already, over the years, because of the rain events, there's a lot of wash. There was a lot of big rocks. There was, channels that had been built into that trail. So we're gonna reestablish that trail in the areas that we've been working. That may take us an additional few days to get that done, graded and reestablished. So if he finishes early, we may be able to hit exactly that 30 days. If he takes a little longer, it should be slightly after that 30 days. So within that time period, we'll have that trail open back up in better condition. That's right now currently. If that changes or we get delayed because of continued weather or delays for other reasons, we're going to notify the public immediately and give you an update on that, when that will be open. But right now, we're thinking 30 days, it should be open back up and be available to use.
Will we be notified when it is complete at the?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
we will get that out.
My name is Jim Moore, and I just live about 10 blocks south of here. Not a whole lot affected by this up here, but do have some concerns. I agree with most everything that you've said thus far. I do have a question, though. The storm that we had that night was, 3/4 of an inch of rain in a half hour. In all honesty, that is not uncommon in this area in the summer. That is quite common. The difference here was we had a fire just a few days before that. Now, we've had 3 fires on this mountain front, 3 large fires since 2002. We had the original one in 2002. I don't remember when the other one was. It's probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And then we just had this one. Now, I see all the plans that you have for debris basin, retention basin type thing. Are you sure that your retention basin that is being planned above the park is sufficient in size to handle not the 3/4 of an inch storm, but the 2-inch storm that could very easily happen? And if it isn't large enough, where is that overflow going to go?
So there's nothing, as Tim said, there's nothing we're going to construct that's going to eliminate every hazard. We can't construct that just because too costly, too big. It just isn't going to happen. So we look at the probable storms that are going to hit. And so there's design and engineering standards that we meet. In the design that we're asking Tim to reevaluate, we're going to exceed those standards. We're going to exceed those all along the hillside. So what the storms that most likely would hit will have protection for them. Now, I'm going to also tell you this. What's incredible about Provo is Hawk and his group, because we can have those storms hit, and with the resources and the infrastructure we give them, they keep the city from flooding. I don't know if you remember, about 3 years ago, we had more snowpack and runoff potential than we had in the '83 floods. With their work in digging out the channel, they were cleaning out Provo River, they were digging the sandbars out, they were going underneath the structures. The city has an extraordinarily proactive maintenance group that takes care of these things. So when you see those debris basins up there, we're not passively watching that go over the debris basin, go down into the storm drain. We're literally pumping those. We have people manning those all the time. So if a major flow hits that exceeds the structure that we have, if Provo still continues to have really superior public works people, we'll find ways to sandbag, add the extra infrastructure that is well beyond what we're constructing now. And so those are the things you will see. Those are the things you see throughout Provo. We saw major flooding up and down the Wasatch Front with those last storm bursts. And one of the things we do is when we see there's any flooding, we evaluate it, and we come back in and we make changes. In the case that Shane was talking about, the gentleman was here, those changes are happening next week. That is extraordinarily efficient. That's how we run things here. As soon as we see a problem, we go to it. There was no obligation for us to go dig out the church, but that is the DNA of the community, is we go out and take care and clean out things once we find there's a problem. And that's a big part of our public works and public services group.
Okay, but still, I mean, this question might be more for this gentleman right there. Are there homeowners and property owners in this room that need to be aware or concerned if the retention basin or the debris basin, the future debris basin, is not sufficient?
Well, you have to define, and let me define what it means to me. So we're looking at two different components when it comes to this basin. One is a sediment load that gets transported by floodwater down into the canyon bottom. And where does that distribute? How does it get caught? And our system is currently being designed to handle 100% of the sediment that would come out of the canyon. It was estimated 15 acre feet, maybe a little more than that, was stored in the channel. We estimate that maybe as much as 20 acre feet, 25 acre feet actually came out, but not all the way down, because the channel caught some of it, and some of it's still in the bottom of the channel and the conveyance channel. So we looked at the capacity of the existing conveyance channel, the capacity of the new conveyance channel, and the capacity of you can imagine that little parks and like, you all are familiar with like Rock Canyon Park. It's that big hole in the ground that they have as a park. If that's the size of that is commensurate with the size of Rock Canyon. This canyon, Buckley Draw, is small compared to that, okay? But we looked at the sediment and how much storage we need to keep the sediment, and the water associated with a post-fire condition, which typically is a 5 or a 10-year storm, maybe up to 25-year storm. And we think the system can handle that. But if you look at any of those parks, any of them, I used to live by Storm Mountain Park up in Sandy, and they all have a spillway Because what we want to do is slow it, still the sediment out, and if we got a 500-year storm event after a fire, I can guarantee you it's not going to hold all the sediment and all that water. So there has to be a designed spillway, and there has to be a designed out piping that will take it to storm drain, and those have to have planned and approved discharge locations. So exactly where all those are going to be, we're still kind of in I think, the design phase for those, but those will be solved. So no, you won't have a situation where, if the park fills up, you're on your own and good luck where it goes. There will be a planned outlet for the water. It's unlikely that will occur. That's a pretty low probability event, but we need to plan for it.
But right now, then, that spillway is probably being planned for Bicentennial Park.
That would be my understanding, but I'm a geologist, and I don't play engineer, so they're designing that based on fluid flows and the best way to mitigate those. If the pond were to completely fill up with water in a large event, they have to model like they did here and figure out the best place to put that. They'll put some of it in the storm drain, but it could overwhelm the storm drain if we got a big enough event after a fire. So then they'll have to have a spillway and a place for that water to go.
So homeowners or property owners right around Bicentennial Park, they should be a little more concerned, correct?
Well, I think everybody who lives in this hazard needs to, like the gentleman that said he saw some plugging off of his storm drain, right? We all need to be really cognizant when we live in these hazard areas for making sure that the infrastructure that we have in place is as good a shape as possible, because that's really all we have. And if we have an event big enough that it overpowers our best designs, we need to be aware that there could be some impacts from that.
Yeah.
But the likelihood are small, but it's there, and if it happens, then it hopefully will just be some water flooding, which, while not insignificant, will not be life-threatening, which is what we're trying to do, protect human health and safety for the most part.
Okay, thanks for your answers.
Hi, my name is Pam Keach, and I just live down on Skyview Loop. I just wanted to clarify, because I'm a little confused. You said that if the developer had put the berm in, it would have been worse. And I think you mean that if they had no construction before this happened, it would have been worse. But if the developer had been required to put the berm in before this, it would have been in place before this happened? Or
Sorry, I'll try to be a little more clear. So if the channel had been in place before the flow, it would have protected everybody at the church. It had been fantastic.
Yeah.
However, if we would have delayed the construction on the site till Rocky Mountain Power had agreed to where the pole and all those details had been done, the actual site construction would not have started till after the fire and after the mud flow. And so we would have been stuck with just the silt fencing.
So they couldn't have started that ahead of time?
That was 2 months worth of construction to get the site graded, so it started moving the grade of that hill, start putting the terracing in that slowed it. In the 10 days we had, we just barely got 2 berms in place and 1 basin, and then the Jersey barriers put in place in the bottom.
Okay, so they were not allowed to do anything before the power lines went?
Yeah, they needed to get that in place before they could start on it.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Kerry Kading, and just a question about the extension of the channel. I noticed on the current channel that's there's a pretty good grade, but as that channel continues north along the mountain, and before it makes that left-hand turn down to the street, it almost looks like it's an uphill grade. What grade is going to be built into that channel to continue that flow?
It's about a 2% grade all the way across there until it gets down to the steep spot. So if you stand up there and look at it, and they're still working on it, it may look off, but it does have a downward gradient that whole way.
Yeah, it sounds like the debris would build up in there and settle before it even gets out.
And yeah, so one of the considerations why the grading permit has to be given for a channel is there are parts of the existing channel alignment that have to be cut down, and there are other parts that have to be built up. So the building of the channel has to happen as part of the grading permit because it has to incorporate mass grading in order to make, so you're right, the grade right now isn't there. It does come down and it comes back up and it goes back down. Part of the development will be to grade that at a 2%. They'll fill in right at the end of the old channel. They're going to build that up a little, and then midway through, they're going to cut that down. But it wasn't, the path of that was encumbered by the right-of-way, and they couldn't start grading until they moved a power pole and the guy wires out of the way so they could build that channel. So the grading there hasn't been done, so it looks weird, but when it's done, it'll have a pitch. We were concerned that there was only 2 or 3% grade. So that's why we've increased the volume of the channel through that area so that it can have a lot more storage capacity and still have the cross-sectional volume for flow as well. So we're hopeful with any small or moderate events that the majority of the sediment just gets caught in that channel and doesn't really make it down anymore. If we have another large 15, 20 acre foot event in the far future, then hopefully that channel will have a lot of storage, and it will also have a lot of storage down at the park, which is the other problem with grading and building the berm and embankment for the basin up on top. If you can imagine, the basin's got to be flat. And when you build a flat basin on a slope, the embankment on the downhill side has to be monstrous. And so for every foot you go up, you also need to cut into the mountain, and then you have a steeper slope on the uphill mountainside and a much higher embankment, and then you have to work around the power lines. And so we did look at that, but it just became very impractical to have a really good design for a basin on that steeper slope, underneath the power lines, and with all of the height we would have to build. It was made more sense to put it in the flatter part of the park for the long-term storage and just have a more robust channel to transmit it down to that storage area.
One last thing. There was a lot of acreage of debris that came out of that channel. Do you really think there's that much more up there that could come down?
A large part of the channel's empty. The younger geologists that I send up there to take a look at that, and I'm not young enough to go up that mountain anymore. I did 10 years ago when we looked at it. They say that there's quite a bit of the channel bottom that's really exposing bedrock. Now, when the channel gets scoured, it gets scoured like a bread loaf. I mean, it's almost flat up and down on the sides. So those can slough into the channel and start to fill the channel back in, and you'll get some erosion more quickly to fill that channel in. It's going to take a while. The vegetation will come back before that channel refills with sediment. And not all the sediment is gone. But there are large stretches of those channels that are now exposing bedrock. And so that's why the water in the video you saw was coming down so quickly. It's because there's not only no vegetation, but in a lot of places there's not even any sediment to slow the water down. It's running right off the bedrock channel. And so all of those things have to be accounted for in the design, the improvements of the armoring and that, because we expect there'll be more erosion potential flood water than large mud events. And we need to slow that water down, keep it from eroding, and get it to where it can be stored and slow down in those basins.
Thanks. Thank you.
My name's Lisa Knapp, and I have 2 questions. First question, if the measures that were already there were supposed to be temporary and last 3 to 5 years, why did nothing happen for the past 20? Question 2, in that permanent solution, you've got the debris channel that flows all the way around and then crosses Slate Canyon Drive. How do you make sure that goes into the basin instead of down Slate Canyon Drive, hits those homes that were already impacted, where they've got the Jersey barriers now, flows down into the other church, 7-Eleven, and all those buildings on State Street?
Let me try your first question. 20 years ago, the standards for cities were a little bit laxed. And so we have a much higher standard where we require much more from our developers, and we make sure that they hit a much higher standard. And so that that's the reason you're seeing us put much more emphasis and why old infrastructure was allowed to linger so long. We're not allowing that to happen. That's something we're changing out. The second question is, there will be, in most any event, there will be water that goes down Slate Canyon Road. That's going to happen regardless, just because of the nature of it. The intent is to get the mud out of it so our infrastructure, our pipes and our storm drain and our curb and gutter can keep it within the public right-of-way. We are looking at that cul-de-sac because that cul-de-sac is a little bit problematic, and that's why you see the Jersey barriers in front of it and the sandbag. So as part of our design, we're looking at how to restructure some of Slate Canyon so that we can fix that. Some of the other problems that took place is on State Street, which is a UDOT road. The storm drain got oversaturated, and we saw flow come back into some of the businesses. So we're going to be working with UDOT on some ideas that might help them make their system a little more robust as well. So if we can pull out the mud upstream and we can take care of it, we should be able to handle it throughout our system.
So how does the flow go across Lake Canyon, over the curb, over the park strip, for lack of a better term, and into the basin instead of just down Slate Canyon and flood?
So we're looking at some changes to the road.
Okay.
And we're looking at also some culverts or whether we modify the road to allow it to go through there. So there's 2 or 3 things we're looking at right now to find out what would be the most efficient and would help us capture the debris the best.
Okay,
so
thank you.
That's what we're working on.
Thank you, gentlemen, for explaining the seeds. Denny Rucker, California Avenue, retired engineer. The seed issue was obvious after you heard it. I have a question. Everybody's talking about all the flooding and everything. It's really concerned. What about the fire? What's the status on that? I mean, on the 16th, lightning hit. Forestry Service showed up, Provo showed up, Springville showed up, Pacific Corp, and I don't know how many other people showed up. They all hiked up top of the hill, put the fire out, quote unquote. Next morning it takes off. Smokey the Bear knows you put your campfires out. We didn't have one crew, one safety crew, one ambulance crew that could have set up there one night and simply watched that site. This poor gentleman's up there every day now because we didn't have all those experts who are supposed to be fire experts didn't take a precautionary stance. And here we go again, 5 years from now, the vegetation's back. What is going to be Provo City's fire stance when this happens again? There's people sitting in the ambulance, they can listen on the radio and set up there. They don't have to sit at the station to do that, right? Second question is, we're having questions about bonds for new parks, and they're asking us to pay for that. Why didn't they ask us for this other park that we want? That's it.
I'm going to answer your second question first because that one I think I know better. So there's no bonds for the park. That is just coming.
They could have had a bond for the park, is all I'm saying. People stood up for it.
Oh, okay. And I know there's a ZAP tax and other things, but there's no bond for this park. The fire, I'm not as familiar with the cause of what that had taken place. I have not heard.
Lightning on the 16th, they went up the hill, the poor guys in their suits, trucked up there, all those services, at least 4 or 5 services. All went up there to put it out.
On the news, it only says there was one fire that happened after.
Yeah, you could not get up that bike drive for all the trucks, the ambulances, the fire engines. They were trying to get up that fire the day before it went up the hill.
So we don't have our fire department here.
I'm just saying.
Absolutely. And what I want to say, that's an absolute legitimate question. And what we'll do is if you can give us your contact information, and those that want more information specifically on that, I will go ahead and get with our fire department and those that can directly answer that question. I don't think that we could really answer your question. We would be making assumptions, and I don't want to do that.
The fire is a major cause of the problem.
And like I said, none of us up here have all that information or probably correct. So if you could just give us your information and those that wants answers specifically to that question, we'll get directly an answer back to you.
I don't really care at this point because it's you guys to have to be responsive. That is.
Again, I'll leave that up to you. If you want to give that to us, we'll get you a response back, okay?
We'll find out for ourselves.
But we will find out.
On that lightning, I know a lightning fire.
Would you please come up? Thank you.
I seen all those guys. My name's Steve Wynn. I live on 1843 South Oregon Avenue, right below. But I seen all the guys go up there. I talked to the officer that saw the lightning strike. And I don't know what the training is on the Forest Service. I mean, they do a good job, but I know when lightning hits a tree or a shrub, it can store it in the ground. They should have dug that tree up and made sure it was out, because that's what it did. It stored underground and burst in. But
So what I will do, again, similar, if you let me know, give me your question, I'll reach out to the appropriate people that can answer that question. If there's questions directly about fire-related, that would be more of those that deal with directly with fire, I would say hold those. There's the contact information there, or the email, reach out to that, and we will get answers back to those questions, okay? I do want, again, be able to provide you with the information, the correct information on answering those questions, okay? You bet.
My name's Robin Roberts. I just live right across the street from the church, so I've been involved in all the flooding. I'm at the tail end. I own Dynamic Collision Repair, and we've been flooded a couple of times. But I've worked with the city, and you guys are doing a great job. Try to mitigate that. I'm at the bottom end, and I'm on the low end, so it's going to happen. My concern is now that we know what kind of mud flow can come out of there, there's also the chance of an avalanche. Now, my wife and I, in 1983, when we had all that snow, before any of those homes were built there, an avalanche came out of there that was humongous. I mean, I stood next to it, and there's an old trailer up there, still there, and it was probably about 75 yards from that. So there's a lot of homes that could be affected by an avalanche coming out of there. I'm sure an avalanche is not going to take a 90-degree turn when it comes out of that canyon. So are there anything that they can do, or is it they're going to watch this? That was without a fire event. That was just a lot of snow. So that's definitely, my dad lived here too, and I go back 4 generations in that same property that we're living on right now, and every 30, 40 years you get a major avalanche coming out of there.
No, that's a great question. One of the things that we do, and again, I mentioned this earlier, our standards have changed significantly. Anytime we have a development on the mountain, we have Tim and his group review for geological hazards, and we make them go hire a separate independent geotech firm to prepare a geotech report on all the hazards of the property, whether it's rock falls, avalanches, slides, faults, whatever the issues are. So again, our standards are a little more robust than they were 20 years ago when those subdivisions were built. So when you're in place, you're in place, but we are now watching that much more carefully. We have denied a number of subdivisions and building lots because of that as a result of those studies. So I don't know if that gives you a higher level of comfort, but that's what's going on.
Hi, I'm Janine Knighton. I live in California. 2 questions as well. One, going back to this idea of the higher standards, but you said that the city owned that development before, or that parcel before it was sold to the developer for the last 20 years. So the question still remains why the city didn't do anything for 20 years when those temporary things were only supposed to be there for 3 to 5 years if the city actually owned that property.
So the city did own that property. Wow, I didn't mean to yell at you. The city does own that property, and over the last 2 to 3 years, well, even before that, Tim has been looking at the request of the city, looking at these canyons, looking at what we need to be doing to mitigate the hazards that have been going on. The cost to mitigate all up and down is in the millions of dollars. And so it's beneficial when we have a developer that's paying the full freight. And so those are kind of the things we looked at to try to get these things done. So in terms of just getting the money for the park, we got that. In terms of being able to have someone pay for the new mitigation, that was done. Hindsight is really good. It'd been great if we did this last year. But the city went through a very extensive public process, didn't want to just jump out until they had met with the residents. I know that process took well over a year. So there was a lot of time that took place. Instead of just jumping out and doing something, we really wanted to have public input. We wanted to go through a more extensive process before we move forward. And those kind of things took time and brought us to the point we are today. So we did know we had to make those changes, but to do those things, we were looking at a process that took a little more time than probably we anticipated.
Okay, my second question, so our neighborhood council had a meeting scheduled this Wednesday that was specifically about this, that the city was invited to, and then the city preempted that meeting with this one, causing the citizens who are concerned to now have to go to two meetings?
Yeah, what we want to do is, those meetings are generally, I don't know how to say it, not well attended. We wanted to be in the neighborhood to meet people, to see people face to face. That meeting, we're going to give the same presentation. So if you go to that, you will see everything we present. Jacob will present the same thing, so you'll be able to hear the exact same information again. But this is intended to make sure we're in the neighborhood, we're embedded with you. We don't want to go there and meet 20, 15 people. This is fantastic. I can't tell you how great this is to see you here. This public participation is fantastic, and we'd love to see this anytime we have an issue going on. So,
Well, if we had been papered like we were for this meeting, for that meeting, and had combined forces, you most likely would have seen the same attendance. So
that room couldn't
it feels like our neighborhood and the voice of our neighborhood was being shut out of this meeting.
I'm sorry about that.
So, and I think, and I will speak for myself, but I will also speak for people that I've been talking to. This seems to be one of the major issues that are, the neighborhood is feeling like they are not being heard. They're feeling like they're not being listened to. They're feeling like, particularly when concerns are being raised, they're being brushed aside. And this meeting is feeling very one-sided. And so that hasn't been doing a lot to assuage that concern. I see my time. Thank you.
Again, if you have more questions or things that we're not answering, or you're feeling like we are being brushed aside, get a hold of us and we will meet with you or anybody else or even a group to go over any of the concerns you have. So hopefully you don't leave feeling like this is it. We will make sure we get with you. There's a previous news conference we did. All of that's online. All of this data's online. So if there's any information you have, we have Tim doing an after-action report that's going to be online. So if anybody has any data or information or studies that they want us to put into this, we ask you to bring that to us. We'll absolutely review it and put it so everybody can review that as well. So we want to make sure you're not feeling that way, that we're absolutely listening to you. And that's one of the reasons you see a whole slew of city people here, because everybody is very interested in this outcome.
Can I help answer her first question about
Maybe at the mic, I don't know.
So I feel like the reason why the temporary berms were put in place along in that field was because they were trying to mitigate flow from the 2002 fire. They weren't planning on another fire. And so that was just until the vegetation was able to grow up there again. The earth berm that they built was supposed to be more permanent, and it did its job. But the stuff in the field that had been removed from the construction was just for that 2002 fire. And they were trying to build more berms and deal with this 2005 fire, but the weather had other plans for us that came sooner than we had anticipated.
Hi, I'm Ashley Rayback. I'm the Neighborhood Executive Board Chair for District 2. So I just wanted to make sure that I invited all of you to our District 2 meeting on Wednesday. It's at 6 o'clock at City Hall. The nice thing about being the neighborhood executive board is that we are sort of independent from the city, so we are also bringing our own expert in. Dr. Lamont from BYU will be there. He has this slideshow, and he will also be addressing the slideshow, and he will also be talking about the different soil things that he has found, the samples he has, and the research he's been doing. So it will be nice to hear another side as well. Hopefully we can come to consensus in the room and have like a really good meeting, but I do want people to know that as a neighborhood executive board, we feel like we wanted to bring our own resources as well so that we're getting two sides, because I understand that because Provo City owns the land and did own the land, that there's like maybe a conflict of interest as well. So it'll be nice to have a third party. So as he said, I can't go to 900 houses nor put up very large electric signs up my road, but it is on Wednesday at City Hall at 6:00 p.m. And we will have Dr. Lamont there, and he does have the slideshow as well. So thank you.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Galaxy. Thank you guys for your time and for everyone being here. So with the plan of diverting the mud like north, in the event that that does fail, is it jeopardizing more homes than it would without that plan?
Anytime we build anywhere, and even on the west side, we have high water tables, we have areas next to the Provo River. Every home in the city has some level of risk. And you even saw the gentleman that spoke earlier today, that's not even below this debris flow, and they actually flooded in that event. And so these homes will have some risk. Every single one of these new homes, just like the previous homes, have some risk. And so the answer to your question is, every time a home's built, there's one more home with risk in the city that we take very seriously.
Thank you. And to kind of further clarify, at least from the image I saw, it seems like it's going, okay, I guess in a way it looked like it was going north enough that it could be affecting more homes than just the new development, because it's now extending the length that the mud is running, if that makes sense. But in order for you to answer, I want to add a little to it too, that it seems like the best win-win, and most formidable opponent against a debris flow would be to have created the channel in what's being developed as Buckley Draw and having the pit there to catch it all, rather than crossing a major road that I need. There's not a lot of, convenient ways to navigate. So thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Tim kind of explained this a little bit. The problem with where the homes are being developed is a very steep slope. And so in order to dig a big debris basin in there, we would have had to berm up and almost create a dam on one side and a slope. It's kind of impractical. It's much better where he showed you that pit was going to be. That ground is extraordinarily flat. So you can just dig a hole straight down. You're not having to do a big cut up the mountain, and you're not having to do a dam that has a potential of failure. So that was some of the logic and why that site was chosen as opposed to the other site. And the road, while it's inconvenient, we hate closing it and it causes all kinds of grief. When the impact is to our road and our storm drain, we call that a success. So anyway.
And yeah, so just with the part that I then let overget, other than the development of Buckley Draw, with this new diversion plan, does it increase the scope of other homes that could be at risk that wouldn't otherwise be?
There may be, but I believe we're going to construct this so the only ones that will be at risk were the ones that were previously at risk. One of the things that might be of some value to talk about, and maybe even at that community meeting, is for people to walk around their homes and look at how they are graded. We have seen a lot of situations, even in other cities, where homeowners maybe do some landscaping or do some kind of, they don't watch where their storm drains and other kinds of things happen. And once flooding happens, it's a horrible experience. It's very costly. Insurance doesn't generally protect you from that. And so an assessment, we've walked around a whole slew of people talking to them about things they can do. So even though the city's going to do everything in its power, it's really critical that you as property owners take time and really evaluate your property. See what you have that you can do to help protect your property. And each one's unique and different. And that could make a big difference too.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for being here.
Hi, my name's Audrey Vivian, and I live on Oregon Avenue. My backyard is basically where you guys are constructing. So we had a front row seat to that mudslide and all the subsequent ones. So I just wanted to clarify on the aerial view, we could see some temporary berms. When were those put in?
So we started putting those in about 2 or 3 days after the fire. So there was excess dirt on the site that we started having them play out. The same time they dug out a debris basin, they extended the channel. So those things all took place over the 10-day period. Since that time, you can see from the picture, we now have 4 debris basins. We've extended the berms quite a bit further, and we've added additional berms along there till the permanent channel is constructed. So you can see from the aerial photography those things that were put in place.
Well, I guess my question is, since we've been watching this construction go on, those berms were not, I know they were meant to be temporary, but they weren't very high or very robust, and it seemed kind of like a mad dash after the first flow to get some protections in place, because the berms weren't very obvious from what, I mean, basically we could stand down at the church and the road was already graded and packed down, which provided just zero resistance for anything. And I know you can see that there are some, but it wasn't, I mean, look, like straight down that way, that was a road that had been designed. And so
Right.
I'm curious why you've mentioned that the development that they were doing actually helped, but in some ways I don't see, I'm trying to understand how it really helped, because it kind of just.
That one. So if you look at the blue, that's a model simulating what the flow would have looked like had the developer not done any work. So you can see that this coming down is a very straight grade, very flat, or straight down. This would have hit the church at a much higher velocity. Where the church received damage, it would have received structural damage as a result of that. Not only would this church been hit, but this is a very steep incline here. The logs and the boulders that came out of here got caught up in what we had put, but they would have rushed down and hit these homes right here. These homes would have been structurally damaged as well. Not only would these homes, there's about 7 of them, this would have come down and flooded a second church, and these businesses would have been hit with the mud from the back end, which would have also been devastating, as well as the substation getting some impact. So as a result of moving, and you can see the red is the actual flow, by directing it further north, had we been able to direct it even another 100 feet, likely this church wouldn't have been impacted. It would have gone around and come back down, avoiding any substantial private property loss. So the berms were just to help push it further to the north. When they graded this site, you're right, they graded a road that came down to the north, but that changed the whole contour of the property, so it no longer came down this way, which was a real blessing for the church, the second church, in those homes. I don't know if that's clear or not.
Yeah, is the blue modeled for water though and not debris? Would that have changed? You just mentioned in the
Yeah.
presentation that debris doesn't flow the same way the water does, so would the blue would be what you would consider water, right?
Right, and it would fall fairly similar. Here, I'll have our expert go through it.
One thing with debris versus water is debris flow. If you look at the Santaquin debris flows of 2005, and others that we've seen, debris flows tend to follow topography. They'll go over a berm, through a house, through a car, it doesn't matter. Once they lose enough energy that they start to dissipate and become more of a hydroconcentrated flow, so less than 60, 70% soil, maybe down to about 40% soil versus water, they start to flow more like a Newtonian fluid. So your curb, your gutter, your storm drain, every city uses their storm drain to mitigate floodwater. That's what they're for. You don't have curbs along the road for looks, you have curbs along the road because it'll direct water. But debris will follow topography. It will go over a curb. So one of the questions was, well, how do you know if it hits the road, if it's going to just go across the road and maybe across the sidewalk, or if it'll just go down the road? If it's a high enough velocity debris flow, it will go over a car in the middle of the road and into the park. If it's water flow, then it's likely that the storm drain system will start to catch it and redirect at least some of the flow. So the biggest problem with that was you had a topography which was straight downhill towards the church. And the debris flow would have flown directly down. And it's hard to turn those. That berm did a magnificent job turning that flow 90 degrees, right? But it wouldn't have completely stopped unless you had a large enough area to catch all that sediment. And nothing that was there could have even carried an acre foot or two of soil. We figure if every 4-foot fence had filled all the way up to the top and cut every bit of soil that it possibly could have, it might have captured about 3 acre-feet of sediment. I don't believe they would have acted that way, they would have fallen over, but if they had, we still would have had about 12 acre-feet of sediment going over that area and down the hill.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everybody, it's a little bit after 8:15.
Can I get in one last question? What I'm hearing is, thank goodness what happened, or it could have been worse. Did you guys do anything wrong? Is there anything that should have been done that wasn't done?
Yeah, they protected 2 churches, you know.
Because we're missing our building for months.
So the issues that we saw, that when we looked at this, there was some evaluation. This cul-de-sac did have some of the mud come in up into the driveway. That was something that we corrected immediately by putting these Jersey barriers out here. This business down here did have flow come in from State Street, so we put out about 260 sandbags.
Sorry for being disrespectful. Yes, we did fail. No, we didn't fail.
Okay, I would say we did not fail. I say we succeeded in a huge fashion. I would talk to these 7 neighbors right here and ask them, did we fail? That'd be the question I would ask. I'll tell you, my number one concern is homes. I don't want churches hit. I don't want any buildings hit. But when you hit a home, you ruin things that cannot be replaced, are irreplaceable, and that is devastating. The second is businesses. If you hit businesses like this, you could put them out of business. This is critical to be protected. Now, again, we don't want any church. That is catastrophic. We don't want that to happen. But there was no way to stop that from happening. If this development hadn't started, in 10 days, there was not going to be enough infrastructure in place. There was no infrastructure we could have gotten that would have protected that church. That church would have been hit. That is just straight up what would happen. This church now received far less damage than what would have happened if we would have sat back for 10 days between the fire and the water experience. Now, the church got hit. That could be determined a failure. I'll agree. We don't like that to happen. Our public works folks look at that very personally, that we don't let that happen anywhere. And so they were out there in force. We had our parks department. We had every department out there. We had people working through the night to make sure we minimized all that damage. Now, if there's anybody to blame, it's me. That's who's responsible for making sure these things don't happen. Critically important. So in every one of these decisions, I was involved in. It would have been great to have the ultimate berm put in place. I agree with everybody here. That would have been great to do 3 years ago or 10 years ago. That would have been ideal. There was a purpose to have a public meeting, talk to everybody about the park before we started any of these projects. That took some time. Should we have done that? Should we have just gone out and started building this? Maybe that is a failure. Maybe that should have happened. But that's not how we run in a city. We talk to everybody, we discuss it, we go through it so the neighborhood knows exactly what's happening and what's going on before we start that. I don't know.
All right, thank you, everybody. Like I said, we've been asked to be out of here at the latest by 8:30, and we've got to take everything down and get it replaced. So if you have, Jacob, you go back really quick. If you do have additional questions you want answered or comments, you can send them back. Again, you can send them back to that. You can call that phone number or you can email that email address. Thanks.